we start to think about perimenopause and menopause more in your mid to late 40s, but actually that transition from your ovaries producing your sex hormones to your adrenal glands, your stress glands starting to take over that production, it can begin in your mid 30s, sometimes even earlier for some women, but it's a very, very gradual shift and changes start to happen around that time. And so you can start to experience quite fluctuating estrogen levels. A lot of women become estrogen dominant, where either they've got too much estrogen or they've got too much in relation to progesterone. So basically their hormones are out of balance. And that really affects the way that your body burns fat.
A very, very warm welcome to the Your Body's Way podcast. I'm so happy to meet you. I know that you're in the UK, which is basically my home. That's where I'm from. So it's really nice to have a conversation about the weather, which is what we always talk about, right? Like if we're from the
That's what we're
UK,
good at. We're good at talking about the weather.
yeah, we love talking about the weather. But what I really want to talk to you about is weight loss for women, because this is your specialty. You are a nutritional therapist and you offer such a rich abundance of resources. So you do plenty of videos, you've got blogs, you've got your own podcast. So you've got so much to share, and I really want to kind of get in on that. So first of all, Louise, if you could just tell everybody who you are and how you came to become a nutritional therapist.
Okay, well, thank you for that lovely introduction. So I went straight into nutrition from college. Like I knew that it was what I wanted to do from the very beginning. And I think that's partly because my mum has always had a really strong interest in nutrition. So I was kind of brought up knowing kind of what food does for you and how it works. And I started off really working with everyone and anyone, like a bit like a general practitioner, GP does, seeing people for things like IBS and chronic fatigue and acne and weight loss and all sorts of different things. But the thing that I really noticed was that pretty much everyone that came to me, whatever their goal was, they always wanted to lose weight as well. And so often that weight loss came as like a happy side effect of focusing on their health and focusing on the other things that are going on in their body. But what was interesting is that the people that came just for weight loss kind of got like the worst results. They kind of saw like the least progress. And particularly for women, as they get past their late 30s, it seems to get more and more difficult, even though they seem to be more and more focused and more dedicated to achieving that goal. So that really kind of drew me into weight loss and women's weight loss specifically. And really what I found is that, the problem with most weight loss approaches is that they are just focused on losing weight by any means necessary, cutting the calories, burning as many calories as possible, instead of actually focusing on what that individual needs to thrive, what's missing, what's going on in their body. And when you switch it and you start looking at what the person needs rather than what they need to cut out, then it really changes, and the experience of losing weight is different, and the longevity of the results are completely different as well.
I love that. I love that you focus on what to add and what someone needs rather than what to take away, because we're so focused on as little as possible, like as little calories as possible, as little of this, as little as that, cut out this, cut out that. And I just think that mindset can be so damaging for so many people. And that's probably why there's so much, people aren't really succeeding in weight loss as much as they should. So I love that you're focusing on what to add in. But can I just ask, you mentioned that you work with women who are in their late 30s. You specifically said from age, I've seen in some of your resources from age 35 onwards, you're like, ladies, I'm here to help. I know what you need. Can I ask you, what is going on with women over the age of 35? Because first of all, I just want to run something by you. I'm a big fan of Mindy Peltz, Dr. Mindy Peltz,
Hmm.
the fasting guru. And something she said in one of her podcasts really stuck with me. And I think it's going to be linked to what you're about to say. She said that women in their 40s, she's like, listen, ladies, this is the decade where you need to really focus on you. You need to look after you. You need to start saying no. You need to start putting yourself first and looking after your health, because by the time you get to that decade, your health can really struggle when it comes to the stresses of life. And I know you talk a lot about that.
Mm.
So for you, my first question is, um, what is going on with women over the age of 35? What made you choose that? What's happening?
Well, I think the answer is that there's a lot going on.
Okay,
And
let's try
really,
and fit this in. Yeah, let's go.
yeah. So after 35, your metabolism naturally starts to decline. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that what that means is basically your muscle mass is starting to decrease at a kind of more rapid pace if you're not putting in a concerted effort to try and maintain it. And so your muscle is metabolically active, and the less muscle you have, the fewer calories you burn at rest. So that's one big thing that starts happening. So you're having to kind of compensate for that more than you would have had to have done in your 20s. But at the same time, your your hormones are beginning to change. So, we start to think about perimenopause and menopause more in your mid to late 40s, but actually that transition from your ovaries producing your sex hormones to your adrenal glands, your stress glands starting to take over that production. It can begin in your mid 30s, sometimes even earlier for some women, but it's a very, very gradual shift, and changes start to happen around that time. And so you can start to experience quite fluctuating estrogen levels. A lot of women become estrogen dominant, where either they've got too much estrogen or they've got too much in relation to progesterone. So basically, their hormones are out of balance. And that really affects the way that your body burns fat, because it impacts your insulin levels, which is essentially your fat storage hormone. It impacts your appetite, your mood, your metabolism, the levels of inflammation in your body, how well you sleep, and all of these things very much impact how you're burning fat or storing fats. So you've got all of those like physiological changes happening. But at the same time, I think more as you get into your 40s, there's just a lot going on in life. A lot of women have still got children at home. Often they've got elderly parents or parents that are starting to need more support, still working full time, and still doing everything for everyone else except for themselves. And I just think all of that comes together to put a lot of stress on your body while it's going through quite a big transition.
That is, it's a really good point, considering the life stage as well, what women are actually typically going through in their 40s. But then also, I just wanted to add to that, women in their 30s, um, part of the problem is that that's when, we often have young children. So I know from experience that, I've got two children under one's 5 and one's almost 2. And it's such a challenge. Like, I've never felt so stressed in my life. And I've definitely felt a change in my physical health. And I'm wondering often, is it because I'm so stressed because I've had kids? And so the life stage has a massive part to play. But so am I hearing you right when you say that when you get to the age of 35, that's when, almost like the beginning stages of menopause start to kick in, like perimenopause? That's literally how early it begins. I remember being so surprised when I heard that. Just, my God, like, from seriously, from age 35. perimenopause begins, so expect to see some changes in your health. And
Mhm.
I've definitely seen it myself. I see it in my friends. Um, so weight gain is such a big part of that, and it's really useful for women to know that that could be part of the problem. So you've already said a little bit about this, but what is the biggest mistake that you see women make when they're trying to lose weight?
I think the default thing that we naturally want to do is cut back, cut things out, and burn as many calories as possible.
And what is wrong with
And
that? Let's talk about that.
yeah, there's lots of problems with it. So one of the big problems with it is that just eating less, it doesn't address a lot of the issues that are happening in the body. One of the things that happens, particularly after 35 and in your 40s, is this change in your hormones. And that's nothing to do with how many calories you're eating, but it has a big impact on where you're storing your fat and how you're storing it and how you're able to burn it. So there's just so much more to it than how many calories you're eating or burning. And if you're only focusing on how much food you're eating and how much you're burning, you're missing out so much that could help with your weight loss journey. Thinking more about the quality of the food that you're eating, thinking more about how nutrient dense it is going to be much more helpful, because if you're eating really nutrient dense food that's meeting your nutritional needs, you're going to feel fuller, you're going to feel more satisfied, you're going to have fewer cravings, but you're also going to be providing your body with the materials it needs to actually make your hormones in a balanced way, eliminate your hormones in an efficient way, keep your gut functioning properly so that you can process those hormones and get rid of them properly. So I think focusing on the calories is a really big part of where people go wrong. But another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with this is that people try to do too much at once. They try and um, cut their calories, start a new exercise regime, drink more water, get to bed earlier, start a new bedtime routine, start meal prepping, and all these things. And it is just so much to change at once. It is incredibly difficult to keep up with. And, this is why people end up yo-yoing, because they try to make all these changes and it's very difficult to stick to. So they fall off the wagon. That makes them feel like a failure, like they're never going to succeed. And then, so you might, kind of be a bit aimless for a while, and then you might find the motivation again, start all over again, and then you go around in that cycle. But actually, if we just changed one thing at a time and did one thing really well and focused on making it a habit, then bring in the next thing, we'd see so much more progress and success in the long term.
I think this is a really well-timed conversation in that case because it's the start of January
Mhm.
and people have just taken on their New Year's resolutions. So, do you have any personal thoughts about making resolutions? Do you advise against it, or do you think, take it slower than that?
I think it's not a bad thing to make resolutions. Often at this time of year, you do feel more motivated, and that whole energy of new beginnings can help you to make some changes that you've been meaning to make. But I think we need to be really mindful about how we do it, and make sure that the changes that we are implementing are things that we are actually going to be able to do in the long term. Um, I think it's important to focus on your intentions a little bit more than perhaps the outcome. So, it might be making a goal to do something consistently, whether that's drink water consistently, as opposed to making a goal to drop 2 dress sizes. If we can focus on the daily habits as opposed to the outcomes, then you're probably going to see more success.
So, speaking about weight gain, then let's kind of dive into that a bit more. So, you mentioned that, you've mentioned already some of the root causes of why someone would start gaining weight, even though typically they haven't really changed anything. So, I think a very common complaint is that I've been eating the same, I've been, exercising, and, if anything, I've been eating less. Like, why is this happening? So, if you could dive into in your practice, some of the root causes that you've come across, and just explain how, like, why are they happening?
Mhm. Yeah, so the sorts of things that we see come up all the time are things like thyroid issues, and that's whether or not they've been told that they've got a thyroid issue by their doctor. We so often see thyroid issues being overlooked or not picked up properly. um, Gut problems. So it might be an imbalance in the bacteria in the gut, or absorption issues, or inflammation, or something like that. Again, that might not be obvious. There might not be any obvious symptoms going on gut wise. Um, Inflammation is another thing that we see a lot of. A high toxic load as well. Um, those are probably some of the key things, as well as what we've mentioned before with the sex hormones changing, and loss of muscle as well.
Right. So just say somebody is thinking, okay, so I've gained weight and, Louise has just gone through all of these root causes. How do I know which one is causing the problem? What's my root cause? How could someone find that out?
It is tricky to kind of figure that out on your own, and oftentimes there's more than one thing going on, because a lot of these things go hand in hand. For example, it's more likely that you're going to develop thyroid issues as you become perimenopausal, and it's more likely that you're going to develop gut issues if your thyroid isn't functioning properly, because often it slows down your digestive system. And then that has a knock-on effect on your liver function and your toxic load. So often there's multiple things going on, and you don't necessarily have to figure out which thing came first. The main thing is that we take an approach that really supports your whole system, which is, that looks different for everyone. But there's a few things that you can do to try and get started with figuring out where you might need to focus on. Paying attention to your symptoms, looking out for things like gut issues or signs of inflammation, which could be joint pain, or skin issues, or um, mood swings, or like depression. There's lots of different types of things that could indicate inflammation. So just really paying attention to your body, and what it's telling you, because our bodies are very good at telling us what's going on and what we need. And it's often just a case of tuning into that and listening to your body,
Mm.
so that you can start to try and work out what it is it's telling you, and what that means in terms of the changes that you need to make.
I was speaking to a guest last year, at the end of last year, and he mentioned this really good book called The Gift of Pain. And
Okay.
basically, it's all about how our symptoms, they aren't something to be afraid of. They're not something to, dislike. If anything, they're a gift, because what they're
Hmm.
actually telling you is what's going on. And a really good way to look at it is if, you're driving a car and the warning light is flashing. You want to get to the root cause of why it's actually happening. But what people tend to do is to just put, a sticker over the top so they can't see it. So they can't see it anymore for a while, but it's still flashing and it hasn't actually been treated. So I love what you say when you say that, you've got to look at the whole system, because um, there might not just be weight gain happening with you, it might be a number of things. So it's a case of tuning in to all of the different things that are actually happening. Like, how is your sleep? How are your stress levels? Like, are you coping with stress as well as you used to, or are you flying off the handle a lot more easily? The quality of your hair, your skin, your gut, as you said, going to the toilet even. So there's just so many things to look out for. And the weight gain is just one part of it.
Hmm.
So if you're gaining weight and you're not sure why, then it's a gift. like the gift of pain. It's something to kind of address, and it's an opportunity to grow and to sort of learn about yourself. But I wanted to kind of talk about the thyroid a little bit because it's so common for women to have it, to have Hashimoto's, or an underactive thyroid, I believe, is the most common.
Mm,
And I heard this really crazy statistic that after women have their second child, they are, I don't remember the exact data, but they are so much more likely to have a thyroid problem. Have you heard that
mm.
as well? Like
Yeah,
after your
yeah, I have
second
heard that.
child? Yeah, there's
Hmm.
something about the second child. It's like, it's almost like your body really gets thrown off hormonally, and your thyroid is so delicate and
Hmm.
it just gets affected. So, but it's also very underdiagnosed. So, why is that? What do you find? Why are women not spotting thyroid problems?
Yeah, I definitely see it in my ladies that I work with. So many of them have told me that after the first child, they just bounced back and it was fine. After the second one, it was like, really, really hard. Yeah. Yeah, put the
Exactly.
brakes
Yeah.
on. So yeah, definitely a common experience. I think that the reason why so many thyroid issues are being missed is because, particularly here in the UK, and I know it's the same in a lot of countries, the standard testing for the thyroid is pretty basic. They typically will just look at TSH, which is the hormone that your brain produces to tell your thyroid what to do, how hard to work. So it's not even really a thyroid hormone, it's more of a brain hormone. Um, and often that's all that's tested, and we don't actually get to see what the thyroid is doing, how many hormones it's producing. If you're lucky, sometimes you might get T4 tested, which is the main thyroid hormone. Um, but again, it's not looked at closely enough. The amount of times someone comes to me and they say, "Oh, I've had my thyroid checked," and you look at it and it's 1 point away from being, you know, underactive. And it's a very big range. And if someone's sitting middle to bottom end of that range, then the likelihood is that they need some thyroid support because it's not functioning optimally. And that's really the key point. There is a very big difference between having optimal thyroid function and having normal thyroid function. And, when you look at the normal population, not that many of them are actually well and thriving. And the normal levels come from the normal population. And so, the normal level is kind of, there's a very low standard for it. And that isn't looked at really when you go to the doctors. And also there's just more hormones that can be tested to see if your thyroid is functioning optimally, and things like thyroid antibodies as well, which are more to do with your immune system and how that interacts with your thyroid. So there's quite a few things that we can look at that just get completely ignored when you go to the doctors, unfortunately.
So, two questions then. First of all, what are those tests that the ladies should be asking for? And the second question is, just say someone has had their thyroid checked and it's come back fine, but they're still getting symptoms. What sort of symptoms would they expect if they were to have an underactive thyroid?
Mhm. So if you go to the doctors and they've just tested your TSH, then want to make sure that they are including T4 in that as well, ideally free T4. There's also T3. In the UK, you just cannot get your doctor to test it. It might be different in other countries. You can sometimes get it tested if you get referred to a consultant, or there's lots of private tests that you can get done. Things like Medichecks and Thriva and various other companies will offer those types of tests that you can do through a finger prick test now. And then it's the thyroid antibodies as well, which are generally abbreviated to TPO and TGA, I think it is. So those are the main ones that you'd want to have tested. And then I can't remember the second part of your question, sorry.
So, if someone was experiencing symptoms, what
Mm.
symptoms are linked to underactive thyroid?
Yeah, so there's quite a long list, and they're quite non-specific in that they can kind of mean lots of different things. But if you've got quite a collection of these symptoms, then there's quite a strong sign that it could be your thyroid. So weight gain is one of them, particularly if you feel like you're putting in a fair amount of effort and you're not losing weight or you're gaining weight. If you're feeling very tired and lethargic, if you're struggling with constipation, dry skin, brittle hair, brittle nails, um, if you are finding that you need more sleep than usual, if you're feeling very cold, and if you struggle to feel warm, if everyone around you seems to be kind of at a comfortable temperature, but you're always cold, that's a key sign. Some women find that they experience anxiety. That's typically more with overactive thyroid, but it can happen with underactive. Um, Low mood, poor recovery from exercise, feeling like it takes you a long time to bounce back after exercise, or just feeling like you can't really put much into your workouts can be another sign as well.
Yeah. And I was speaking to someone last year, also the
Mm,
hair loss on the ends, the outer edges of your
yes,
eyebrows.
yeah,
And
the outer third.
right, and then hair loss on your head possibly, but not male pattern, more
Hmm.
just overall over the
Hmm.
top, which I
Yeah.
found really interesting. Um, but it's really interesting because the thyroid is so sensitive to stress.
Hmm.
Um, and stress, emotional stress, can often be a massive contributor to thyroid issues. And it could even be the reason why, the whole, who knows, like after having the second child, that could be why. It's like, the emotional stress of having two, like it can't be
Hmm.
understated. So um, that kind of leads nicely into stress, because I know you speak a lot about stress, you speak a lot about cortisol and how that could be a root cause of weight gain.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, can you dive into that a little bit more? Because there's so much going on in the world at the moment. It's really challenging times. So, how is emotional stress impacting women and their weight gain?
Massively,
Mm,
because the way that our bodies work is that we produce our cortisol, our main stress hormone, from our adrenal glands or our stress glands, which are located on the top of our kidneys. And whenever whatever phase of life you're at, it's disruptive to be under stress because it's very inflammatory, it's disruptive to your hormones, it's just disruptive to your sleep. And as I've said already, disrupting your hormones is something that impacts your weight management, but also impacting your sleep is detrimental to your weight management because of how it impacts your hunger hormones and your appetite and inflammation in your body. um, but after the age of 35, 40, when you're starting to go through perimenopause, you're even more susceptible to the effects of stress because of the way that your body is shifting the production of your sex hormones from your ovaries to your adrenals. So if you're under a lot of stress, then your body is always going to prioritize making stress hormones over making sex hormones because it's more important for your body to be able to respond to stresses, which, if you think about evolution, that would have been running from a tiger or surviving a famine. Those were probably our main sources of stress. So it's more important for our bodies to be able to respond to that stress than it is to be able to reproduce. So our bodies are going to prioritize producing cortisol. So that extra stress is going to make our hormonal symptoms worse and exacerbate them, and also may well speed up that progression into perimenopause if we're under a lot of stress, sort of in our late 30s. Um, and I think one thing to mention as well is that there's lots of different types of stress that we can experience. Emotional is massive, but there's also physical stress, and not eating enough, doing too much exercise, being sleep deprived. These are all things that will drive up your stress levels, even if you've not got emotional stuff going on at the same time. So it's important that we're really doing as much as we can to look after ourselves and to feed our bodies and nourish our bodies and get plenty of rest, because typically when we're trying to lose weight, often, a lot of people will get up an hour earlier to go and do a workout, but that might not be the best thing to do if you're, only managing to get 6 hours sleep a night or less. So we need to think about, what do our bodies actually need to manage that stress load, and make ourselves more resilient to stress.
So is this why some women, when they want to lose weight, they start smashing the gym and they start eating less than their body actually needs to not only operate normally, but then to fuel their workouts? Is that the connection then? Why they're not losing weight, even though they seem to be literally pushing it more than they've ever pushed it before?
Yeah, it's a really big part of it because it's just so stressful on your body. And then, thinking about the thyroid in all of this, stress is a really big suppressor of your thyroid function. But also, we need enough fuel for our thyroid. We need enough calories, we need enough carbohydrates for your thyroid to function properly. So, particularly in recent times, a lot of women will default to cutting out the carbs or going keto or going very low calorie. And those are all things that will underfuel the thyroid. And initially, it won't affect it too much and they'll see weight loss and maybe feel quite good. But then over time, the thyroid will start to downregulate, and that will mean that weight loss will plateau. They'll start feeling tired. It may start disrupting their sleep, and they'll start to feel like they're just not getting anything out of their workouts and the calorie restriction.
I mean, this takes me back because I used to be a studio instructor. So I used to teach many, many classes a week. I was teaching spin classes, I was teaching body combat, Les Mills. I don't know if you remember that, or
Hmm.
I was doing like aerobics classes when aerobics was a thing. And I was basically training. And I remember that I was probably my biggest at that time. And
Interesting.
I remember like being so confused. I was just like, why am I not even just losing weight? Like I'm training so many hours a week, more than anybody around me at the gym. But yet I was the biggest that I'd ever been. And I found it
Hmm.
very difficult to keep weight off. So I found if I was to, overindulge, the weight would pile on. It felt like it pile on like twice as quick. And I remember being so confused. And there's such a thing now, and I'm really glad that everyone's waking up to it, that actually, when it comes to exercise, like doing less is so powerful. Like
Hmm.
doing, like you said, getting all the rest that you need and then doing exercise that you can manage. And I'm a massive fan of resistance training, like lifting weights,
Hmm.
and because it's so less stressful on your body
Yeah.
than cardio and like jumping around. And it kind of it makes a lot of sense because when I was doing all of the cardio classes, spin, body combat, aerobics, it was just all cardio. And I find that my body must have just been burning out. There must have just been so much cortisol in my body at that time. And there's this it's basically a thing that anybody who teaches loads of aerobics classes, it's they often complain of the same thing, like I wasn't the only one.
Hmm.
So it's so interesting that it's more important than people think, like this cortisol stress link. How does someone know if cortisol is the cause of their weight gain? So is there any particular kind of areas to look out for? Like how do they know that cortisol is causing their weight gain?
Mm. Again, it's difficult to pick it out from all the other things that could be going on. But I think, some of the things that you mentioned, like, finding that you've got a short temper, or finding that you're, kind of more emotional, or your moods are fluctuating a lot. Particularly if you're finding that you're you're doing lots of workouts, you're restricting your calories, but you're not seeing any movement on the scales, then that can certainly be a sign. I think water retention and kind of a more like puffy face is often something that a lot of my clients see a change in when they start focusing more on their well-being and managing their stress levels better. Um, and things like waking up in the night, if you're waking up repeatedly in the night, then that's could be a sign that your cortisol level is too high and not coming down low enough for you to get into a restful sleep. Anxiety, all those sorts of things I'd say are key signs. But they're not necessarily going to be super obvious, because so many of these things are just normal. They're just things that we've got used to and we feel like it's just a normal part of life. We blame it on getting older, or we blame it on the menopause. So I think it's important to pay attention to what you feel is disruptive to your progress and to your well-being.
Mm. And sorry, I was just typing there when you were talking because this great classic book came to mind. Have you read Fat Around the Middle?
Yes, by Marion
Yeah,
Wenville.
yes, that's right.
Mhm,
That's right. That is a fabulous book, and it's all about how cortisol causes weight gain. And
mhm.
fat around the middle, obviously, the title says it all. A big sign is that you tend to gather weight around your waist.
Yes.
Now, you can probably describe this better than me, but basically, the reason why is because fat likes to protect your vital organs. So
Mhm,
if you're under stress, then the fat will kind of collect around your middle because it's just in fight or flight mode, it's in protection mode. So that's why stress can lead to weight gain around the middle. So that's something to look out for as well. Have you noticed that with your clients as well? Like, is it quite clear to see?
definitely. And
Great.
it's probably the first thing that I should have mentioned. I completely forgot about it. But yeah, that is one of the key signs, is fat around the middle. Um, and sometimes I have clients who have lost a considerable amount of weight, but it's really stubborn around their tummy.
That's right.
And they're the ones who we really need to get them to focus on their stress levels. And they're often the ones who are, really busy, never stop. Actually, that's just reminded me, I've got a really good book called Rushing Woman Syndrome.
Write it
And
down.
it's really good. I recommend. It's a few years old now, but it's a really good one to help you realize the impact of stress, but also just being constantly busy and never stopping and always doing things to other people, just the impact that has on you. And actually, in that book, there are lots of checklists that you can run through to kind of see, whether certain types of stress might be impacting you. So I definitely recommend reading that. I found that it really helped me to kind of actually stop and say, okay, this stress is something that's impacting me as well. Because I kind of knew all of it, but it put it into quite tangible like context, if you know what I mean. It was quite relatable.
Mm. And just to add as well to that, that a classic kind of body shape to look out for when it comes to cortisol is not only gathering weight around the middle, but also the limbs can be slim. So
Mm,
let's say a typical, slim legs, slim arms, but then just weight around the middle. And that's
definitely.
because stress can eat away at your muscle mass as well as
Yeah.
age. Your muscle mass is such an indicator of health and vitality. And if you're stressed out, then your muscle, you'll very likely lose muscle mass. Um, if something terrible happens to someone and they stop eating and then they lose weight really quickly, a lot of that is actually muscle mass because
Hmm.
your body is holding on to fat during stressful situations. So it'll prefer to eat away at the protein rather than the fat stores, which it finds much more important at that time.
Hmm.
So also that's something to look out for as well. Everyone's different, we all have different body shapes, but that's a sort of classic apple shape. That's also an indication of stress, causing,
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
like the weight gain that you're speaking of. Um, so it's someone can say, okay, I hear you, but we all have stress. And come on, like, how am I supposed to get through this stressful time? How am I supposed to deal with my issues? It sounds so easy, but it's actually not. It's quite hard to
Mhm.
deal with stress. So when you have someone who is dealing with stress, what are your best tips to get them started on kind of climbing their way out of this?
Mm. I think it's important to realize that you can address it from a few different angles. From one side, there's trying to reduce stress where possible and trying to delegate and just lighten your load, which that's often the difficult thing. But if you can do that, then great. The other side of it is supporting your body through the stress. And that might mean, making sure you're eating lots of nutrient dense food and fueling your body properly, making sure that you are getting all the nutrients you need. And a real key nutrient is magnesium. We burn through a lot of magnesium when we are stressed, and we also lose a lot when we are drinking lots of coffee, if we drink lots of alcohol, if we're exercising a lot. So most of us have quite a high demand for magnesium, particularly if we're stressed, and it's a very calming mineral. So that's definitely something to consider, which could be added in the form of a supplement or Epsom salts or a magnesium lotion or various other ways. Um, and B vitamins as well are really key. And your green leafy vegetables and nuts and seeds are a really good way of getting your B vitamins, whole grains as well. Um, so making sure that you're giving your body the nutrients it needs is really key. And then there's lots of things that you can do to try and really like modulate your stress response, and things like um, deep belly breathing, making sure that, for a minute or a couple of minutes, if you can, that you stop and you focus on your breathing, and you make sure you're breathing into your belly rather than into your upper chest to stimulate your diaphragm. And stimulating your diaphragm helps to stimulate your vagus nerve, and that helps to put you into that rest and digest mode, which is the opposite of fight and flight mode. And there's a few different ways that we can do that. Things like singing and humming help to stimulate that vagus nerve as well. Um, and then also doing things like cold showers. If you're brave enough, then cold showers help to do that as well, or even just a little bit of cold water exposure. It could just be splashing some cold water on your face. So there's like little hacks like that that don't take much time, but can have a really big impact on your well-being if you can do them consistently. And then if you have got a bit more time to play with, then things like reading, having a long hot bath, doing walking or kind of lower impact exercise as opposed to loads of cardio, that can make a really big difference as well.
Mm. And you've mentioned a few times that you need to nourish your body and
Mm,
not underdo things, not cut things out. So, can I ask, because there are so many different opinions out there on what to eat, and I think what I've come to the conclusion of is that I think a lot of the messages out there are so extreme because extreme sells.
yeah.
So you have keto experts, you have fasting experts, paleo experts, carnivore experts, and they all say that that is the only way to do it. Everybody should be doing it. You're wrong if you're not. That's very much the message that's put out there.
Mm.
Do you agree with any of the extremes, or what is your general advice when it comes to losing weight through what you eat?
I really believe that everyone is different,
Mm.
and what works for one person isn't going to work for someone else. And that's because of genetics and because of environment, your lifestyle, and what you're able to achieve and what's going to be sustainable for each person. I've never really understood how a practitioner can kind of label themselves as like the keto nutritionist or whatever, because that excludes so many people that that just isn't going to be right for. There are people who will do well on keto, but is it sustainable in the long term? Is it actually really good for them and giving them everything they need? I would say probably not. But there will be cases where, someone might do well on it.
Mm.
So I think you've got to look at the individual, you've got to look at what works for them, and you've got to look at what's going to be sustainable. And that really all comes from looking at them as a whole person and what their body needs, and also what else is going on in their life.
Right. I'm actually I'm very flexible myself, and I enjoy dipping into different diets and seeing how they feel, and so I actually don't blame anyone for trying these things, being like,
Mm,
oh, I did keto and it really worked, I really liked it, or I do paleo and it just kind of works for me, and so I don't blame anyone for that. But like you said, everybody is different, and what works for one person won't necessarily work for another.
mm,
But there's this really great test that someone can do to see if their meal actually agreed with their body. And this is what I heard from Lee Brandon, one of my last guests, and it's always stuck with me. He said there are three things that your food affects: your mood, your energy levels, and your oh, I'm about to forget the third. I'll forget the third. Um, but anyway, I'll come back to that. But basically, let's take mood and energy levels. So if up to 90 minutes after you feel cranky, you feel moody, your appetite. That's right,
mm,
your appetite. So they're the three things: mood, energy, and appetite. If up to 90 minutes later you're still hungry, or or you're cranky, or you feel tired, or whatever, then that's a pretty good sign that what you've just eaten didn't quite agree with you. And then you go back and you sort of figure out what it could have been. And
mm,
you kind of make a log. So you kind of have, you write down how each meal made you feel. Um, the correct meal should make you feel energized, you should feel satiated, and you should feel fairly stable in terms of your
mhm,
mood. If assuming that nothing stressful has happened in your life at that time, you should feel fairly stable. So that is also a really good sign, because
mm,
talking about, let's say low carb or high carb, or do you eat grains, do you not eat grains, that sort of thing. Sometimes it is a good idea to go low carb, and sometimes it isn't. Like, we
mhm,
change as to the seasons and the time of day, even. So even just kind of seeing how you feel after each meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and how that probably changes. It's really interesting to keep a log. So if someone's really kind of ready to geek out, that's such a good technique. And it's
definitely.
brilliant. Like, I find that sometimes after meals, like especially dinner time, I feel like I'd want to go to bed. And then
Mhm,
that's a really good sign that it didn't work. Like, there was
mhm,
something in that meal that wasn't quite right.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a really good tip that I've heard.
Agree.
So if someone is stuck in a yo-yo dieting cycle, what is the first step to break the cycle and to begin losing weight naturally? So just say they're finding it difficult, just say they've been cutting down on their calories and they find that as soon as they eat more now, they just gain like, twice the amount.
Mhm.
Um, so how would you kind of coach someone out of that yo-yo dieting cycle?
I would get them to change just one thing. Like I said before, people often end up yo-yoing when they try and change too much, and then they fall off the wagon. So I would just get them to change one thing, maybe two things, and get them to do that well. And then once that is cemented as a routine or a habit, then move them on to the next change. And also, I'd get them to work on their mindset and how they are thinking about food and weight loss, and get them to think about, again, nourishing the body, adding stuff in, as opposed to what can I cut out? What should I not be eating? What's a good food? What's a bad food? And try to stop labeling foods as good and bad, and instead look at food as at how nourishing it is.
Mm. So I think a really good tip that I'm getting from you and just overall is just start to think about what you can add in,
Mm,
rather than thinking about taking things out. And take it slow, one step at a time. Do one simple thing, master that, and then move on to the next simple thing. And I think I agree that it's a really good way to start a new lifestyle and to bring on a new habit and to start to lose weight naturally, and also investigate the root causes. So whether that means taking
mm.
on a professional to help you, or popping to the doctor, or I think that's such a good place to start. So, I mean, Louise, this has been such a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to add that you think we've missed?
I don't think so. I think we've pretty much covered it.
Lovely. Well, how can people find you and follow your work?
They can find me by searching at Louise Digby Nutrition on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, or they can visit my website, which is louisedigbynutrition.com.
And you have a great podcast as well. What's its name? I've forgotten its name.
Yeah, it's called The Thriving Metabolism.
That's right. That's right. Okay, cool. Well, that was such a great conversation. Thank you so much. I got so much from it. I know that everybody listening did as well. So I do hope that we can do this again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.